So Little Richard, another terrific early rock and roll entertainer, being introduced by Alan Freed, the disc jockey who supposedly invented the term rock and roll. You saw filmed versions of performances of those songs, but what most people were doing was listening to those songs on the radio. And increasingly, it was a radio they could hear in their cars. They could also listen to it at the beach, at the malt shop. Probably not in school, because schools were strict about, taking in a radio and listening to it. But a transistor radio, developed in 1954. The transistor, invented in 1947. Look at this, most popular electronic communication device in history, with billions being manufactured in the 60s and 70s. I had one, or two, or three. See, it's got a little antenna. Actually, you can't see that. It's got a little stand, right? This one does. It has a built-in antenna. It's got 8 transistors. I'm sure it's got a volume dial. It's made by Emerson here in the U.S. And then the gold dial there is to turn into the correct frequency, because remember, the radio stations are broadcasting on frequencies. It's the size of the radio wave that determines the frequency. So a 103.9 frequency wave is a different size from a 99 frequency wave. And by telling the radio what wave to pull in, determines what channel you're listening to. Okay. Okay. Again, Alan Freed, his picture is in the upper right there, coined the term rock and roll, disc jockey in Cleveland, which I guess is why the Rock Hall of Fame is in Cleveland. And there's some other early rockers shown here in this picture. Jerry Lee Lewis underneath Alan Freed in the upper right. And I can recognize Chuck Berry right below the big beat, another important rock and roll pioneer. And I think the guy to the right of him is Frankie Lyman. I'm not sure. Oh, no. Buddy Holly and the Crickets to the left of Chuck Berry. You see this guy in his glasses, and they've got their bow ties. The Beatles loved Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Buddy Holly wrote his own music, which Elvis never did, for instance. Wrote and performed his own music, and it was very original, different rock and roll music, very distinctive. It's one reason the Beatles are named the Beatles, the Crickets, the Beatles, get it? And Paul McCartney, one of the 2 surviving Beatles, John Lennon's songwriting partner, owns all the rights to Buddy Holly's music. So the car, the transistor radio, and rock and roll music. There's Alan Freed on the left, Buddy Holly on the right with the glasses. I'm not sure who the rest of the folks are, but early rock stars in the mid to late 50s there. And Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Frankie, help me, Frankie, he sang Donna. You guys, I want to say Valenzuela, all died. They were going from one rock show to another, I think in Wisconsin. It was winter. They were in a small plane and making the hop to go to so to speak, they're in the plane to go to another show. Plane went down, and those 3 rock and roll legends died, and this gave birth to a song called Bye Bye Miss American Pie by Don McLean, the day the music died. Oh, you learn all kinds of unimportant things from your professor, I'm afraid. Here are some disc jockeys. I didn't even realize I had the Beatles up here. John Lennon on the left, haha, my motif. Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and I'm sure it would be if he wasn't cut out of the picture, we'd have George Harrison on the far left. I'm not sure who the guy is in the middle. I'm thinking it's a DJ. Now, I know for sure the guy underneath the Beatles is Wolfman Jack, very famous disc jockey from the 60s, late 50s and 60s, with a voice like this. It's Wolfman Jack. That's the best I can do. He was syndicated. He was on radio stations all over the country. And then a very famous DJ from today. You probably know the guy on the left there, Howard Stern. So the DJ phenomenon really starts in radio. And these are the guys who are announcing on the radio and then playing records and keeping up some kind of patter or something interesting between the records. Here's one I listened to as a kid in St. Louis. This is the Johnny Rabbit Show on KXOK. And you can see there's a little rabbit ears thing. He was the cool DJ when I was a kid in the 60s, and I had my transistor radio under the covers of my single bed, listening to the Beatles, the Byrds, the Rolling Stones, Chuck Berry, Bob Dylan, all kinds of music being played on the radio for the kids, the youth. So the youth culture, in a way, altogether kind of saved radio. I'm not going to play Johnny. I'm not going to play Wolfman Jack. I've got so many videos in this presentation already. I don't think I need to. There's Howard. Howard Stern, very unusual DJ. Controversial. You either like him or you hate him, I would say. And he's now, I think, on Sirius satellite radio. And he has a big percentage of the Sirius company. He's worth a great deal of money. He does not play music on his shows. He did maybe at his very beginning of his career, but very soon it just moved to all talk. He has a cast of characters that support him and guests that come in to talk, and he's got an amazing way of doing interviews and going right to all the personal details, how much money they make, who they have sex with, whatever. If you know Howard Stern, that's what you know him as. So these interesting personalities on the radio, the DJ, starting kind of playing music, but then becoming and turning into talk radio. DJs on talk radio. Radio today. Okay, so we've kind of gone through our history from the first radio broadcast on Christmas Eve to creating a business with William Paley and others, forming networks of radio stations, comedy programs, suspense programs, news programs. Edward R. Murrow, I didn't even show that, broadcasting World War II from London live. And then the advent of TV, radio starts at least its second life because of the rise of the youth culture and the automobile. Transistor radios, rock music, propelled radio in a different direction. Becomes really a local medium, city by city, each city with its own kind of star rock DJ, like Johnny Rabbit, etc. And now, today, radio advertising revenues are just about $18 billion. Network radio is very small. Network radio is radio that's broadcast nationally to lots of different stations at the same time. Most radio is local. It reaches a local, city-by-city audience, really. Now, online audio obviously also growing like heck. And then this word podcast, which was, I think, invented around 2002, 2003, the podcast. Hey, it's radio shows. Podcast is like the most brilliant rebranding. It's right up there, and frankly, much better than Meta. 25% of 18 plus podcast listeners listen on Spotify. If I were to ask you guys to raise your hands, how many people have heard of podcast, I'll bet you almost everybody in this class would raise his or her hand. Sirius, fiscal 2019, almost 30 million subscribers. Pretty amazing. It's got billions of dollars in revenue. It's advertising revenue. This is an ad-supported medium, except for public radio, folks. Just like, and it doesn't have, for the most part, subscriptions. At least it hasn't in the past. So, unlike a newspaper or a magazine, radio is free, supported by the ads. Okay, so some things going on recently. Okay. Sirius is a serious player. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This launched, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago. Social network exclusively on audio called Clubhouse, where you can tap into conversations, group conversations. Kind of interesting. Don't know if you've seen it, but you might want to check it out if you haven't. Some people are calling radio audio now, actually, just like this does, via audio. Because, I don't know, it seems like when you look at podcasts and satellite radio and this kind of thing, it's more than just radio. Radio, just like most media during COVID, listenership picked up. This is from an agency called Kramer Purcell, from a survey that Nielsen did. Nielsen is a big measurement company. I'm sorry about the noise in the background, everybody. Radio has 9 lives. I just want to say a word about program formats. This is a very famous radio host who just died last year. Rush Limbaugh, you may have heard of. This is talk radio. It's very conservative politically. He had 15 million regular listeners. He was on a network. In other words, a lot of local stations broadcast his show simultaneously. So he was all across the country. Most radio, though, is local, and it's called spot radio. Like each city is a spot on a map, I guess is what we're thinking about. These are the local radio markets in the U.S. You don't need to really know a lot of detail about this, other than, when someone wants to buy radio, they're going in and buying not just the actual metro city, but in kind of the broadcast area around the city. Important to note, you can target by language with radio, just as you can with magazines and newspapers and pretty much all media. You've got Spanish language, Korean language, lots of different languages possible, lots of radio stations doing different languages. And you'll remember I spoke a little bit about my partnership with Eduardo Caballero, Vista Sonido, Sight and Sound. Eduardo Caballero, very distinguished, successful businessman with an Hispanic background. His origins were in Cuba, so Florida is where he was from. One of the things he did in his career was form a whole network of Spanish-speaking radio stations, and he called it Caballero Spanish Media. And radio available in lots of different languages, really micro-targeted. There's even a Radio Korea. Okay. So there are language formats, and then there are also genres. But genre for the movie business, for the radio business, is called formats. So these are some of the many, many, many formats. This is the programming that's run on radio stations. And there you see a whole bunch of them. Okay. So we've really gone through the whole first part of this radio discussion. I'm going to stop here, and we're going to pick up next talking about the business. We're well over halfway done with this. I'd say we're at least 2/3 done with this presentation, folks.